course. Thanks for reaching out.
Well, mate, I absolutely loved Lapsis when I watched it. I thought it was such an intriguing and fascinating film. I was wondering if you could start off by telling us a little bit about where the original idea came about for Lapsis.
Yeah, I think it came from a couple places. One, my own experience working for like the last decade as a freelancer, independent contractor here in the U.S. and experiencing that lifestyle, which I tried to capture in the film of kind of like the treadmill of gig to gig living and the kind of promises and pitfalls of everything that brings you as a
Okay,
worker.
okay,
So I wanted to capture that. And then I'd say also I have a background in neuroscience. I studied neuroscience in college, and I think the actual mechanics of the world came from kind of imagining like the constant rewiring of a brain in a real world, the plugging in and out of connections. I think there was something kind of brain inspired about that.
it's an interesting concept. How difficult was it to put into film because it is such a an intense and obscure kind of topic to try and tackle in a film? How difficult was that when you sat down to actually work on the script?
Yeah, it was difficult because we were inventing a new type of job with its own rules. But I actually find that part of the process the most invigorating. Love what it's called world building, I guess. Coming up with all the details, the things that make it feel like the world has a scale and a depth beyond just what's on the in the frame. That's really what I love the most about the whole writing process. So it was a lot definitely to conceive of the whole thing, and certainly to do it on a low budget was another difficulty. But in the writing process, it's just what gives me the most thrill to come up with the whole the rules of how the world works.
Yeah, that was my next question because, of course, with such a topic, you would had to have had robots and things like that come into the film. How difficult was that to try and write when you knew that you were working with such a low budget?
Yeah, I wrote to what I thought we might just be able to pull off, and then I think in the end we just were able to pull it off. We were able to get robots for free from the University of Pennsylvania. I found a robotics lab that was able to make it a summer program for their PhD students, and they brought their robots and integrated it into their academic work. So that was a huge coup for us to be able to collaborate with them. Then we had to find little hacks and shortcuts, and there's these big steel cubes in the film. We only had enough budget to afford covering. We only built one cube, and we only had enough budget to afford covering the cube with two sides of metal. So we were constantly twisting it to keep the metal sides in frame. So stuff like that were just the only way we were able to do it.
Yeah. And how long did the actual shoot last? And whereabouts did you actually shoot?
The shoot was 26 days, and we shot around where I live in rural New York State, about an hour and a half north of Manhattan, and some on state park land, some on private property we'd act to, and the crew stayed in a local hotel, and it was a fun shoot, but harsh elements. In the middle of the summer, a lot of mosquitoes.
Awesome. Now, tell us a little bit about the character of Ray, because I think everybody who was at the screening of Lapsis that I was at fell in love with Ray. Tell us a little bit about the character development there and what led you to come up with a character like Ray.
Yeah, this character was inspired by this actor, Dean Imperial, who plays Ray. Dean is a longtime friend of mine who had never acted in a feature film before, had only done one short film a decade ago, and has not been trying to be an actor. I asked him to do this, and he, agreed, but sort of was unsure why I would cast him in the lead in my first feature film. But I had a very clear idea that this character, Dean was the only one to bring this character of Ray to life. And, I think, in a way, Dean Imperial was kind of like the muse for the whole movie. I wrote this character because I knew Dean is not someone who ever would go camping. He would never go hiking. He's a New Yorker through and through. No interest in any of that. So I was constantly inspired by thinking about putting Dean in these situations and imagining, how he'd react. And the brother relationship is very near and dear to my own heart. I have 3 brothers, and I also one of them has dealt with chronic illness, and so I was writing that very much from my own experience too.
What was that like when you first went to Dean and told him that you want him in this film? Because he is so brilliant in this film. I was actually quite surprised when I looked up his IMDb biography and saw that he hadn't done more, because he is such an amazing actor. What was his first reaction when you went to him and said, I want you to be in this film?
Well, I think he was, as I said, he was surprised, because it's a lot to stake your first film. I'm going to go out and raise all this money. I'm going to call in my, all the favors. I'm going to try to make it happen, and he's going to be the leading man. And I was so sure about it, but he took a little bit of convincing, because it's not something he'd ever imagined he'd be doing. And he was hesitant, but absolutely, once he, agreed to it, he was all in, and he gave so much to the project. He helped along the way naturalize a lot of the dialogue. We ran it through his filter, and if something felt off to him, he would suggest an alternate. So it was a great collaboration. And this all came because I saw him in a reading once, and I felt like he stepped in for someone who didn't show up to read in a playwright's reading. And I just had a feeling like he had this leading man energy inside of him. And I was sure of it. It was a bit of a gamble, but I was sure of it.
And how did he enjoy all the hiking and everything that he had to do as part of the film? Because it looked like you had them walking a lot through the forest. How did he find that?
Yeah, well, as I said, this is not something he'd ever choose to do. He's not interested in camping necessarily. And so we ran him, through the whole, as you saw in the film, he has to get in and out of tents. He has to set up tents. And moments like that, I would organically ask Dean to do it. That Dean has, I don't think, ever set up a tent before. We rolled the camera on him trying the first time to set up a tent. And, it was hard. There were days when he was pulling that cabling cart up hills and sweating, and, but he was so committed. It was almost like method level. He would go and do laps in the forest before we'd shoot the first shot of the day to make it feel realistic, like he had been cabling for hours, And he was just so committed. It was wonderful.
And what's it been like for him after the shooting the film? Like, has he received more acting roles after this? Because I'm hoping to get to see him in a lot more films over the years.
I know. We're all hoping. I've not heard that he's received any more roles. So anyone out there who's casting should consider him. I think in the void of James Gandolfini, Dean maybe has a small place to fit.
Definitely.
Or a large place to fit.
Yeah. So now tell us a little bit about how you came up with the whole idea about Ray's ID. Like his ID name leads to a lot of kind of confusion out there on the path, but also leads to a very, very intriguing story. How did you come up with that storyline?
Well, honestly, the name Lapsis Beef Tech just sort of arrived in my head. It's ridiculous. I don't know where it came from. It's not inspired by anything. I couldn't give you any kind of etymology on it. It's sort of an absurdity that came and I accepted it at face value and ran with it. I mean, the story itself, the mystery, and what happens with the medallion and everything that was a longer, more deliberate, process of working through that story. But I knew I wanted to write a story that involved someone getting a head start into some capacity based on something they inherited or something that was just sort of given to them that fell into their lap, and how they come to reckon with that start. Do they take it all for themselves and run with the riches, or do they decide to help the collective? And that was the kind of tension I wanted to get at in this film.
Awesome. Now, for all the filmmakers out there who are listening, this was your first feature after working on shorts. Tell us a little bit about how scary that was at tackling your first feature, and what was the biggest difference you'd noticed when you started to film from what you had filmed in the past?
Yeah, well, I come from doing. I've done a few documentary features. That's been predominantly my work. was documentary. I'd done some commercials. I'd done one short, but the thing that I was most sort of new at was working on such a scale of collaboration. A lot of the documentary work I had done was lone wolf, one-man banding it, and this was just working with a crew of upwards of 30 people. Sometimes we had over 100 speaking parts on the film, the extras, and that was a challenge, of course, for me. I was learning on the spot, but what prepared me the most from the work before, which again was mostly the documentary work, was I think there's this sort of a universal grammar that applies to any kind of filmmaking you're doing, whether it's documentary or fiction, short or feature, where when I'd get to a new setup in this film in Lapsis, we'd have limited time to figure out what shots to get, where to put the camera, and I would often find myself thinking about, if this were a documentary, what details would I capture of this setting to make that would stand for sort of the large sum of all the parts. What little details would stand for the larger whole? And in scenes like Ray goes to this big expo, there's all these extras, there's little details here and there. I'd often think of capturing it like a documentary, and that would help me move quicker and save time. On a first feature like this, it's all about just like stretching your time budget as far as you can. Time is money, so I would be leaning on those kind of like documentary instincts about where to put the camera, I think, to save time and make decisions quicker.
Awesome. So to finish up, Noah, because we're almost out of time, what would you like to say to our listeners out there before they get a chance to head out and check out Lapsis in cinemas?
Well, I really hope they enjoy the film, and I hope that it captures something that they, even if it's just sort of an overwhelming feeling about the absurdity of some things in the world we live in today. I hope that they feel some of that is echoed in the film, because I think there's so much absurdity we accept as reality. So an absurdist piece of science fiction maybe is more read as realism at times, I think, and that's one way I'd like to think about the film.
Definitely. Well, Noah, again, congratulations on such a brilliant film, and thank you so much for chatting to us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Dave.
Not a problem, mate. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
Recording